Saturday or Sunday was the story. It's intense. Intense. Yeah. Okay, both of them. Keep them for okay. I'll strip both of them.
Lately, we've been starting out just a little bit of sort of I call it contemplative meditation, um, uh, something that was kind of came up in the text in the previous class. So say that we just take a couple minutes to start with something, from the last class, very simple. Or it's not simple, but it's a simple comparison. Uh, something in to contemplate. So it would be this. In the last class, it said, Maitreya, in this text said, here. So it said that the mind's nature is clear light, unchanging, and is unharmed. Right? It's like space or like the sky. And just as the sky isn't harmed by clouds. Today it's cloudy and raining, so like the sky is not harmed by the rain. Just so the nature of mind isn't harmed by our experiences. And that nature of mind is always there. It's not someplace else. Right? It's right here. So we think, right? If I have experienced anger, but the nature of my mind is untouched, is pure, is like unstained by anger. I have experienced fear, worries, upset, cravings, you know, traumas. The nature of my mind is unstained by any of those experiences. Mm. Just as space is like unharmed by uh, an object flying through it, just so the nature of mind is unstained, unharmed and by the experiences that have arisen. And that clear light or that space-like nature is always present. All of our suffering, all of the causes of our suffering are temporary. They just arise due to causes and conditions. I say they're conditioned phenomena. And they arise due to causes and conditions. So suffering and its causes can be eliminated. This clear light nature of mind was always there, will always be there. It's on Buddha nature. And because it's always there, I think I have the potential, the capacity to become a fully awakened Buddha. Keep going for a couple more minutes. One point that's implicit in that is like incredible hope, actually, right? Like I have this capacity because of the nature of my own mind. I have capacity for limitless goodness, limitless love, limitless compassion. And so to eliminate have the capacity to eliminate any negative, qualities such as like hatred, ignorance. I have the capacity to develop limitless positive qualities like love, compassion, wisdom, joy. And all beings, right, their nature of their mind is this clear light. If you contemplate that just a little, you start to feel, one may start to feel, right, that others, right, who have this capacity don't see it. So being totally overwhelmed by suffering and the causes of suffering, uh, don't know, don't recognize that they have this limitless capacity already there in their being. It's the, actually, if you think about that, it's totally unbearable, right? The idea that Like people have this capacity for joy. But remain stuck for now. Gets to our motivation, right? So then the motivation for studying this kind of text is like, may I myself, because the nature of my mind is clear light or like space, may I engage in the practices to eliminate the mental afflictions that cause suffering and the sufferings themselves, all the obstacles, in order to help myself and limitless others, right? To realize the nature of our own minds, the ultimate nature, especially of our own minds. And with that in mind, just like once the verse of refuge and bodhicitta, just do it slowly and we can just contemplate. Because remember, the Buddha is just somebody who's fully actualized the understanding of the nature of their own mind, fully actualized eliminating the causes of suffering and the obstacles, and developed all good qualities. And so, and here when we take refuge in the Buddha, in this text it emphasizes we're taking refuge in our own future attainment of Buddhahood, not so much emphasizing the external Buddha, but our own future attainment of Buddhahood. So I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfection. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then you're on text, and for those who are following, we're on page 11 here at the bottom. And you're going through this, we're on the section now that's talking about Buddha nature, or Tathagata in my Freya's text. And we already covered the three jewels, the first three topics, and the fourth topic, Buddha nature. And we're on a section that covers that describes Buddha nature in terms of 10 things about it. And we're on the ninth of those 10, which is called immutable. Right? The Buddha nature is immutable. Yeah, immutability. That's how this translator did it. And so, and in the previous class, it made a point. My trainer made a point, which is that he said there are three stages, right? I was pointing out last time that there are different ways that we are there are limitless ways we kind of divide people, or we label people or something. But anyway, here it's Buddhist context, so they're talking about that it's unchanging or immutable. Right? Buddha nature is the same whether you're uh, uh, impure or partially pure and partially impure or totally pure. So what's that saying? Well, impure is just somebody who has mental afflictions. So it's like us. So, people who have craving, anger, pride, jealousy, and so on. Partially pure and partially impure means somebody who's seen reality directly and therefore has partly purified their being, but is still practicing. And then totally pure is just somebody who's a Buddha, who's gotten beyond all the mental afflictions. And so it's saying whether you're have lots of mental afflictions, whether you're on a bodhisattva who's eliminated some of them, or whether you're a Buddha, your Buddha nature is still like space, right? It's still clear light. It's not different. Um, so that's the first point he already made. Uh, and now there's a section where he describes kind of what it's like um, for bodhisattvas, and particularly when he talked about bodhisattvas here, right? He's talking about bodhisattvas who are on the what they call the Arya paths, right? So bodhisattvas who have seen emptiness directly. So it's quite an advanced. So I was thinking about this actually. So he's getting it. He's talking about quite an advanced level of practice now in this part of the text, and we'll go through it in a second. But as I was sort of thinking about it, it occurred to me like a lot of times like, when we um, teach Buddhism in the U.S., we don't always emphasize these kind of very advanced levels of practice. They're what the monastics study, and um, in various countries, but and so on. But they're not always emphasized, because they can seem far from our experience. And I was thinking about it as I was reading this, and sort of contemplating it, and I was like, it occurred to me. Well, a couple of points occurred to me. One is there could be a benefit in studying this in the sense of it's laying out what path we're trying to progress on is one point. Another point is it can give a kind of sense of hope or inspiration if you're inclined that way. Um, and then another point actually which I thought about, which is I was like, oh well, why people don't not. I mean, I've been lucky in this sense. If you've spent time with very advanced practitioners, which gotten the chance to do, then you can read things like this and go, oh, that's what they're like. That's their experience. Maybe I'll share a couple of examples of that as I go through it. But I was like many times, of course, we might not get that opportunity, uh, but that's another point, I guess, is that it's possible. Like that this is also describing the experience of somebody who's on the path, who's quite advanced on the path, but there are people like that. That's not they are around. um, but it's not getting an experience that we maybe have, probably. Um, but so okay, so I'll pick up. So it says immutable during the impure and pure state. So that means the part state, and there's a point I'll make in general, where it says, what is it? This is like what they're getting at is the partially pure and partially impure. Um, and that means what they're getting at, first of all, I'll say in general, that means that's referring to these Arya bodhisattvas who have seen emptiness directly. So it's describing what's their experience like. And Gyaltsabje in his commentaries says, okay, what is this partially pure and partially impure? What does that mean that they're partially pure and partially impure? And he says there are different meanings that you can take from that. One is um, one is relative. In other words, that compared to ordinary people, they're pure, but compared to Buddhas, they're impure. That's one way of taking that phrase. Another way of taking that phrase is that, and we'll get into this in a minute, but I'll explain it more. But he says they're pure in the sense that they're not born by the power of karma and mental afflictions as we are. So the Buddhist view is that if you look at the 12 links of dependent arising, when an ordinary person like us or any ordinary person is dying, they give rise to fear, actually. If you're an ordinary person as you're dying, you give rise to a kind of sense of fear. Um, and that activates your mental afflictions, which activates your karma, and then your karma kind of takes you to another rebirth. Whereas they're pure in the sense they're not born that way. They don't have that process when they die. Um, but they do still take rebirth um, within samsara, which we'll get into in a minute. So they're not totally pure. That's a more precise sort of philosophical explanation of this partially pure and partially impure. So I'm just getting what does that phrase mean? So the text says, the Arya Bodhisattvas freed from the sufferings of aging, sickness, and death, and realizing the basic elements of nature as thusness, right? So the basic element is our Buddha nature, right? So they realize thusness or emptiness, which is the nature of their own mind. And through that, they are liberated from the misery of rebirth and so forth. But having realized the basic element or Buddha nature's nature, the intelligent ones display birth in order to cultivate compassion. Um, so I'll explain more about this as we go along. But what it was, it's saying in essence, right? It's saying this is describing people who, on the one hand, they've realized their Buddha nature. Right? So we first covered what's the word? Ordinary people, right, who have not realized their Buddha nature. Here he's saying this is like an introductory verse. So he's saying, um, now I'm going to describe essentially these Arya Bodhisattvas. So these people who, have realized bodhicitta, so they live with great compassion, and they've seen the ultimate nature of their own mind, the nature of their basic element or their Buddha nature. Um, and then it says they are liberated from the misery of rebirth and so forth. And yet they display, it says display intelligent, these intelligent ones. Intelligent here doesn't mean smart. It means intelligent actually usually means they have great merit, actually. But it could also mean that's usually I once anyway, intelligent can mean that or it can mean they've seen reality. So like sometimes in our culture, the word intelligent can imply like I'm smarter than somebody else, or something like that. That's not what's being done here. What's being done here is intelligent in the sense of understanding the nature of reality, understanding the nature of things. And so it says they take birth in order to cultivate compassion. Right? So as they're dying, their thought is like that, right? And and that's quite remarkable, isn't it? And actually, it just reminded me, so I'll just share a personal story for a moment. I remember, if you, what's there, right? Um, that's remarkable. I guess I'll just leave it at this for now. I'll get into it in a minute, but that's quite remarkable, right? So the idea is that this person, right, as they're dying, is thinking, how can I be most of service to others? That's the person's thought. That's the describing, right? This bodhisattva, that's how they die, right? They're dying with a sense of, without personal attachment or personal fear, but with a sense of what's the most useful way for me next to help others and cultivate compassion and progress towards helping others more and more. That's how they approach death, even. So that's what's being described there. Um, so now it says immutability during the impure and pure states defined on the basis of birth. Um, so it says Arya Bodhisattvas have eradicated the sufferings of death, sickness, and old age from the root. They are free of the sufferings of samsara because they are not reborn by the force of karma and mental afflictions. Um, and so, and then, well, let's see. I'll read one more verse and I'll kind of talk about it. And it says, because of the method aspect and the direct realization of the basic element just as it is, they are beyond birth and so forth. Having the essence of compassion, they manifest death, sickness, and old age. Um, so this is a kind of, I personally, I've sometimes found this section of his text a little confusing at first. Because it's saying they're beyond uh, death, sickness, and old age from the root, right? They are free from the suffering of samsara because they're not born by the force of karma and mental afflictions. And I remember once I asked my teacher, Yume Kintsu Rinpoche, about this section, and he said what Dachi same thing Gyaltsab Je says, which is he said they're born within samsara, but they're not samsaric beings. So what does that mean? Right? And what it's actually a technical. I'll explain it. It's a technical point in Buddhist philosophy, which is being a samsaric being means you're born through the power of karma and mental afflictions, right? That you're very, and this is like, so it means like your very being, right, arose from. Like, so ordinary people, our basic element, our Buddha nature is unstable. But our body and mind themselves, what's the word, are in the nature of samsara. So samsara, and it's an important point, isn't it? In Buddhist philosophy, they say that samsara is not a place, right? You don't say, oh, like this place is samsara. Oh, this place. Like sometimes we say that, like marketing, right? Oh, it's nirvana. So this place is they say, oh, this place is samsara and this place is nirvana. Actual Buddhist view is not that. Samsara, what's the word, is a way of being present, right? Is a way of being in the world, or in any world, actually, uh, not just this world, which is having a body and a mind that are under the control of, and that are under the control of mental afflictions, of ignorance, of craving, and so on. And the truth is, like our bodies and minds are like that. So even if you don't want to, like, even if you think, oh, I don't want to crave anything, cravings arise. Right? And if you think, oh, I don't want to be hateful, but then the wrong circumstances arise, you get angry and you might hate somebody. Right? We don't have control over our own mind or our own body entirely. We have partial control, but not that much. Um, and that's because we're born that way, right? That's how we're born. Our basic element or our Buddha nature is always unstained, according to Buddhism, right? So that's the interesting point, right? It's like it's, anyway, it's this idea that your fundamental nature is pure, um, but then anyway, if you check your own experience, right? It happens, doesn't it? Our body gets sick, whether we don't want to get sick, but we get sick. And again, mental afflictions, we may not want to give rise to them, but they happen under the wrong circumstances. Even if you think, oh, today I'm going to try to be quite this way, then something happens and suddenly you find your mind going a different way. Um, and that's because, according to Buddhism, we're born, right, in 12 links of dependent arising. We're born through the power of ignorance, grasping things in a way they don't exist, which gives rise to mental afflictions, and that gives rise to karma. And then that's sort of the process of samsaric rebirth. So, what this is saying is um, these kinds of bodhisattvas, who are Aryas, who have seen, and Arya means noble, which means they've seen reality, they're not reborn that way. So their bodies aren't like that, and they don't experience their bodies in that way. And their minds aren't like that, and they don't experience their minds that way. They have a different kind of experience. Um, and then so he said, they're not samsaric beings, Kensei Rinpoche said. That's what that means. They're not a samsaric being in the sense that their body and mind aren't like ours. They're not conditioned under the control of the mental afflictions and karma. And then he said, but they're within samsara. So what does that mean? And in this context, what that means is these kinds of bodhisattvas who are not yet Buddhas haven't eliminated uh, all of the mental afflictions and all of their imprints. So they're not yet a Buddha, right? And a Buddha is in the final nirvana. These bodhisattvas are not yet in that experience. So they're not yet, so they're in that sense and also another meaning is they take rebirth within samsara to work to help others, right? So they kind of intentionally, out of compassion, take rebirth. Um, and maybe I'll share a little bit of a story related to this now, because I think it can seem quite far from our experience, maybe. Um, but as I read this, I remember actually it comes from the person who introduced me to Kensei Rinpoche was Reba Rinpoche, who's pictured there. This picture, you guys can't see it, but that's Reba Rinpoche there. He was my friend, teacher, mentor, and I remember this when he had cancer and he came to this area. I don't I, so long. I won't tell the whole story. I'll brief part. But he had cancer and he came to this area and he asked me to help with his treatment coordination. So I was helping with his treatment coordination. And actually he kept showing me these pictures. He was funny. He kept showing me pictures he had of a house he had built in India. And he was showing me, I didn't know Kensei Rinpoche, but he said, oh, this is who was my current teacher, but he said, oh, this is Kensei Rinpoche's house. It's right next door. And he was like, "This is the house I built. This is the house of Khensur Rinpoche. It's in India. It's near the Saramay Monastery." And and one day as he was talking about that, he was showing me, and he kept telling me about Khensur Rinpoche. And I thought he's telling me about this person. I never met him. I was like wondering, he's in India. Maybe I'll never meet him. I don't know. And then he said to me one day, "Oh, I haven't spent much time in that house." And so I said to him, "Why'd you build it? Like, why'd you raise funds to build a house that you haven't spent time in?" And he said, he said something funny. He said, "I'll be spending time there." And I kind of looked at him. I was like, "You're like in your 80s." I didn't say this, but I was like thinking, "You're in your 80s and you have cancer and you're late stage cancer." And I kind of was like, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I built that house for my next life." Uh, and I thought, wow, I've not, like it's a new experience for me. Somebody saying, but and he said, "I built it next to Kent's Rinpoche's house because I'll need a good teacher." Uh, and and then he said, "Why do I need another life?" And then he said, "Look at this body; it's getting old. I can't do much anymore." He kind of slapped himself like that. He was like, "I'm getting old." And then he said, "And the world is filled with suffering, and people are fighting for all kinds of stupid reasons." Basically, he didn't say stupid. He said people are fighting for all kinds of reasons. And he said, "I'd like to do some efforts at interfaith talks and interfaith interactions, but my body's too old to do that. And I'd like to keep teaching and helping people, but my body's too old for that." And he said, "So I need a younger body to work for others." So that's why I built that house. He said, and he was getting at the experience like this, right? And then he said to me something like, he kind of said, "I'll see you again, but there will be some difficult experiences in between." And then he said, "But we're not afraid of difficult experiences. That's fine." What he meant was dying and taking rebirth. That he would die and take birth again. Um, and I was like, "Oh, okay, that's the experience this is getting at. Somebody like that, right? Who's uh, a steward. They take rebirth in order to keep working for others. Um, so it's getting at that kind of person. Um, yeah, then actually it was funny. Then he introduced me to Ken Rinpoche. I won't tell that whole story either, but I watched him ask Ken Rinpoche to be his teacher in his next life. And Ken Rinpoche said yes. And then he started telling me some of Ken Rinpoche's good qualities. Was Ken Rinpoche said, "Don't ever talk about my good qualities." You can talk about, he said, don't talk about anything good about me. Um, he said, "Oh, it's not good." But yeah, remember she said, "So he said, like, I want to sit at his feet next time. So do you want to study with him also? We can be as students together." It's kind of funny stuff. Um, anyway, so this is getting at a person like that, if that makes sense. Actually, one of the stories, actually, it says this in this text even. It's like, wow, it says they're free from sickness. Actually, it says it here. They're free from sickness, old age, and death, yet they manifest sickness, old age, and death. Right? And I would not be able to understand that if I hadn't met Rinpoche. That's why I'm sharing the story. Uh, and I remember I had many experiences like this, but I'll just share one. And once I was saying this to somebody yesterday, but I remember when I was like, "What does it mean to have you're free from sickness, old age, and death, but you manifest sickness?" What is? And I'm saying this is not an ordinary person's experience, right? But I remember I had many experiences. I'm using him as the example. He was at that kind of experience, but this is one of many times. I remember once I was in this. It was actually at Fairfax Hospital, and it was the person, was the head of. I don't know if he was the head of all of oncology or a certain part of the oncology department. He was like a doctor older than myself, must have been in his 60s or something at the time. He was the head of the department, and uh, I took Rinpoche there, and he uh, he had cancer. Right? I already said that, right? And the doctor looked at his scans. Like they have those. He had a whole bunch of scans done, and the doctor said, "Oh my goodness, he must be terrible." He was talking to me, 'cause I spoke English and Rinpoche didn't. So he was saying he must be in unbelievable pain. Exactly where these tumors are. He said, like, "This is what I do. This is my specialty. That's extremely painful." And he went into Rinpoche and he said, "I'll prescribe you pain medication right now. Like, you must be in unbelievable pain given the nature of these tumors." And Rinpoche kind of smiled, looked very relaxed, and said, "Oh, I don't need any pain medicine. I'm not in any pain." And the doctor said, "That's not possible." "Yes, you are." Like that. And Rinpoche said, thank you so much, but for helping. But no, I don't, I'm not, that's not my experience. I feel quite comfortable. And the doctor said, like, the doctor turned was like, are you all misunderstanding? Like, is there a problem with translation here? Or something seems to be going wrong. And they're like double checking with, and he said, like, he was like, he wasn't, like, sometimes somebody can like, what's the word, tough it through. That wasn't what he was saying. He was like, no, I don't have any pain, so I don't need pain medicine. Um, so I was like, oh wow, and he was like that in various contexts. So like, where point being, like, at that level of the path, that's the experience of that person. I mean, that's what it's saying, is that they don't experience their body. They don't experience, they have a body like anybody else's, right? In the sense that medically, but they don't experience their body like other people do. So it's getting at a certain level of the path where that's your experience.
I was just thinking about you. You had told the story before of somebody you met who, um, had to endure torture from the Chinese.
That was him
Oh, they
also.
had,
Oh, there you go. Right, and what's he say? He's like, oh, I just felt so bad for the karma that my jailers were or are suffering. And you're right. He wouldn't feel it like we would feel it.
No, that was actually that was my core experience of that time with him. There came a point where, when he actually came here and asked me to help with that cancer, and I think I've said this maybe to some of you, but he had told previously that story about where he had been jailed by the Chinese and communists for 18 years, actually, on and off, tortured and eaten. And, I mean, he said he wouldn't even describe some of the torture, like, if you can read about what Chinese
Sure.
did in the prisons during the Cultural Revolution. And he said at the time, this is many years earlier, when I first met Rinpoche, he had said, although my body was tortured, my mind only felt pure joy. And at the time, I thought, I don't understand that. I was like, I have to understand. Like, I was like, became like a koan to me. I was like, I want to understand, how did he experience, like, I can't experience pure joy at a resort for half the time. Like, I'm like, oh, the sun's a little hot. And I don't know, like, I don't really go to resorts much, but like, whatever, I have a little bit of indigestion, something's bothering me, or like, oh, that person, they looked at me, I don't know, like, pure joy is hard. And he said he experienced pure joy for 18 years while being in a Chinese communist prison in Tibet. And so for many years, I thought, how could that be? And I was like, I would try to understand it. I would ask him questions, and by watching him go through the cancer treatment, I finally understood, like, that question. It was the answer to and then I actually had a weird experience one day where I was with him, and I thought, he was like, there came a point where I realized he was done. Like, he had come here, he asked me to help him. I helped him for about a year with his family, helped him too. It wasn't just me, various people. And then it's getting at this point about out of compassion. I realized, oh, he knew I had that question. And I was like, I think he came here to answer the question. And then he was like, okay, now I'm done with that. I can go get my new body. Um, and that the cancer was, his experience of cancer was a teaching, I felt, for me, actually, and for his family. Um, because he didn't experience it in a way. Like, and I was like, I watched him experience pure joy. And actually, I've said this to some of you before, but it wasn't just me, actually. Like, it wasn't, I know there were lots of nurses, doctors who weren't Buddhist, who were like, would come to me with like tears in their eyes. Like, I've done this for all these years, but I've never seen somebody who, what's the word? I'm trying to remember how they said it. They would just say, I've never seen someone like him before. How do you find somebody like him? That was actually a couple of nurses said to me. Uh, I told that story before with the doctor. Some of you, like, his main doctor, not a different doctor, it was his main doctor, was the one who had to tell him, oh, you're going to live or you're going to die. And he said to me one day, the doctor said to me, I spent my whole career telling people they're going to live or they're going to die. It's what you do as an oncologist, obviously. And he said, nobody's ever done what he did because he had told him you're going to live and he told me you're going to die. And he had the exact same, Rinpoche had the exact same kindness. He was actually when the guy said, I think you're going to live, he was like, Rinpoche was very kind to him. Then a few months later, he said, treatment's not working anymore. It looks like you're going to die. And the exact same response of kindness. And the doctor came to me and said, in all my years, I've never come across somebody like that.
Really inspiring.
And that's what this teaching is. So I'm like, so this teaching is like, I think, to be honest, if I hadn't met Rinpoche or somebody like him, I don't think I could have related to this teaching. So that's why I'm sharing the story. stories, a couple stories about him. Right, so that's what it means, like manifest sickness, right? It says here, having the essence of compassion, they manifest sickness, but they don't experience sickness in the same way as an ordinary person. Is the idea that this text is saying, but I've seen that happen. Um, so they go through those experiences in order to engage with others with compassion. That's what it's getting at. So they take rebirth in order to engage with others with compassion. Um, and actually, I'll just share one more story. This is not my personal story, but I'll share one more. That always struck me about this one of birth through compassion. The Dalai Lama, right, is famous for doing the right. This is current as the 14th Dalai Lama, right? But oh gosh, it's the third or the fourth Dalai Lama. I'm forgetting right now, but I think it's the third Dalai Lama I'm referring to, but I may have the number wrong. Anyway, it's either the third or the fourth, but there was a time, right, when during the when the Mongolian Empire was the strongest. It's actually the largest empire still that ever existed, land empire ever existed on the planet. After it was so this is a few generations after Genghis Khan, right? There was Genghis Khan and then Kublai Khan, um, and so they were the most powerful military on the planet, and they started getting interested. The Mongolian culture started getting interested in Tibetan Buddhism. Studying Tibetan Buddhism, they would just demand that sometimes they would send an emissary and say to the most famous Lama in Tibet, "You come," and the idea was if you don't, we'll invade your country. So they would go teach. Um, so then one of the Dalai Lamas was a teacher to one of the Khan in that way, and he said, "I want to help create peace on the planet." So then they say the Dalai Lama thought, "How can I help create peace on the planet?" So he died and took rebirth as the son of that Khan. Uh, so now it became a different kind of relationship to the Khans, right? Where one of the Dalai Lamas was Mongolian, actually. Um, so it created a bond between them and a sense of, and it started to shift Mongolian culture. Not just that, various lamas were doing various things, but the relationship created a change in Mongolian culture during that time. Uh, so I'm just giving examples, right? Birth through, right? A way of like, how do I actually help this person? I'll through birth as their child. Imagine as your plan. Um, anyway, so that it's getting at this level of practice.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
So is this what is one of the things going on when a bodhisattva passes, that for the 2 weeks we're gathering intention and focus on where they're going to next?
Yeah, so that's what happened. Yeah, so like and actually, so in Tibetan culture, of course, Tibetan culture is unique. Or I mean, it started in Tibetan culture, it expanded to a few other Central Asian cultures now, like Mongolia, Bhutan, where they, identify reincarnate people or something.
Yeah.
But the idea in Buddhism is that you don't. That's a cultural phenomenon where they actually recognize the person, but Buddhist view is that always existed. I mean, Atisha, for example, who was an Indian Buddhist master, was known to have been they said he could remember he'd been a scholar, a Buddhist practitioner for many lifetimes, and he could remember who he'd been and all that. So the idea though is like that, yeah, that the person after they die, if they're a bodhisattva like this, what's the word? Like we make sometimes like our plan for vacation or retirement or something. They make plan for the next life. And so yeah, it's like that. And sometimes the practitioners will be like their students will be sort of making prayers, like may you come back, things like that. Uh, but the idea is that it's relational. Yes, it's a relationship that goes through lifetimes. Um, and they try to determine where would be the most beneficial place to take rebirth is the idea. So yeah, question. Oh, is that in the way? I can't see. Is that better? Okay, good. So next, the text describes 4 stages that bodhisattvas go through. And they are the first is, so there are four stages. The first is the first, and they're, we call these bhumis, right? The bhumis, which are the ground. Bhumi means ground or earth. So it's four levels, you could say, that bodhisattvas go through. There are actually 10 bhumis, but here it's broken down into the first of these four is the first bhumi, which is the one on which you first realize the nature of the mind directly. Then it's just categories of bhumi. The second of these four is the second bhumi through the seventh. Then the next one is the eighth through the 10th, and the last one is the last remaining lifetime, the last lifetime before they become Buddha. So it's these four categories there that it's broken. This text breaks it down into. And so we'll just go through them. So first it says, the first says about the first bhumi, these next two verses. And first bhumi means first ground. So it's this level on which a bodhisattva has already realized bodhicitta, right? And now they've seen emptiness directly for the first time. So it says, even though the children of the conquerors, right? And by the way, that's a term, that's a epithet for a bodhisattva, right? And children of the conqueror, it really means that they're going to grow up to become a Buddha, right? Conqueror is Buddha, an epithet for the Buddha. So child of the conquerors means they're going to grow up to become a Buddha. They're on the path to becoming that. Like you could also take it as an indication that they're being taken care of by the Buddha itself. So that's the second meaning. But so even though the children of the conquerors, these bodhisattvas, realize the immutable nature, right? So the immutable nature, right, is Buddha nature, right? So they've realized their own Buddha nature. They are seen by those who are blinded by ignorance. Who's that? That's us. Right? Jan raised their hand. um, which is interesting, right? So that's how that's blinded by ignorance. And what does it mean? It means we can't see reality. We're not literally blind necessarily, but it means blinded by ignorance means we can't see the nature of reality yet. Right? Yet, it's an important point there. We eventually will because we have that immutable nature. But so those kinds of bodhisattvas are seen by us as taking rebirth and so forth. It says this is truly wonderful or amazing, which it is actually, right? That somebody would engage with the world out of compassion and love to that extent. Then it says those who have attained the domain of the Aryas, meaning this level of the path, display themselves in the domain of the childish. Jeremy's right. This is the method of those friends of migrators. And friends of migrators here means they have great compassion, right? So it means they're like a friend to all, that they don't, and migrator means, actually, a migrator means what we were getting at earlier. In other words, sometimes in Buddhist texts we say migratory beings. So yeah. So a migratory being means like you're a migrant, right? You're traveling, yeah, and you don't have a permanent abode, And it means what it means really is that it's somebody who's under the control of ignorance, right? So because we're under the control of ignorance, we don't have control over where we're going, and that we don't know how to control the process of our own death and rebirth of our own body and mind, and so things just happen to us, right? And we want security, right? But we don't find it, and yeah, anyway, that's true. So this is the method of those friends of migrators and supreme compassion. And the supreme compassion here, what does that mean? It means it's a certain kind. It's referring to a particular kind of. I often note this that we don't have terms, like cliche, actually, which is like it's true, but it's a cliche that in I guess Inuit culture, right? There are many words for snow, and so people who so some people in that culture can see kinds of snow that we don't notice because they have terms for them and they have ways of understanding what those different kinds of snow, how they impact the natural world. Anyway, point is, Tibetan culture, Tibetan language and culture has many, many words for different kinds of compassion. So they are looking at which kind of compassion are you generating now, and you introspect and you say, oh, is this kind of compassion or that kind? And they're all different levels and types of compassion that you can develop. So here they're referring to this word supreme compassion in this context. They actually differentiate because they make a point. We can have compassion for an individual person, right? Like so you see somebody suffering and you feel compassion for them, and that's good. It's the term for Tibet. The general term for compassion in Tibetan is Ning Je. Ning is heart, and Je means the most exalted. So it's like the most exalted state of your heart is compassion, which is a beautiful term, I think. But so that just having compassion, like you see say an animal suffering and you generate compassion, then that's Ningje. And that's good, but that's not supreme compassion yet. And then there are other kinds of compassion. But I'll give one in the text, in the commentary, it gave an example of uh, people they're practitioners who are following the vehicle of individual liberation, trying to achieve their own liberation. And they sometimes meditate on compassion universally for all beings. So they'll sit and meditate and they'll sort of generate a kind of compassion where they have equal compassion for those who harm them and those who help them, for strangers. And that's called universal compassion, limitless compassion. Sometimes called the immeasurable compassion. It's another term, which is a remarkable state, right? Imagine that. So you have a compassion where you feel equal compassion for people you've never met, and as you do for your closest friends, you feel compassion for all of them. And it's a kind of equal level of compassion. That's a very wonderful kind of compassion. But that's not what's being described here yet either. Supreme compassion is a reference to, in Tibetan, there's this term laksam, which is the unusual attitude. And so this kind of compassion is a state where the analogy they usually give is this, is you think of the compassion a mother has for their child who's suffering. If you're like in a hospital, right, and you see a mother with a child who's sick, where they would do anything, right, to save their child. They would like give anything to save that child. This is compassion where the bodhisattva has that for all. The bodhisattva has cultivated like a state of intense compassion, like that of the mother for the only child, but it embraces all. That's supreme compassion, and that's considered supreme compassion. So it's remarkable. You could almost, it's a remarkable kind of state where they would do anything, whoever they come across. The remarkable kind of description, isn't it? And we don't ordinarily have terms for those different. I don't think we do have a way of capturing that, but so I've tried to describe it. Yeah.
I kind of unrelated. No, it's not related. Um, so thinking about bodhisattvas who take, at the time of death, right? They're motivated by, as we were talking about, by compassion to take rebirth, and they do. Um, are those on the Hinayana path, on the individual liberation path? They don't take rebirth when they die. They directly realize emptiness, and they attain a mind of nirvana on death, and they don't come back because they don't have that compassion motivation that bodhisattva has.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yep.
Okay, interesting.
And you have to have this level. And one point they're making here is that compassion I just described, like the mother for the only child metaphor, as an example, but it's that intensity of compassion, right, that causes them to be willing to take rebirth.
Yeah.
And part of that is you have to imagine it, actually. I mean, I think you're getting at a point which is interesting, which is like, from one perspective, you can imagine like it's quite blissful, that state of liberation, quite, what's the word? Delightful, quite wonderful, right? To feel liberated from all the kind of, what's the word? I mean, it's gross suffering, right? Like, but it's also subtle suffering. It's the subtle suffering of feeling insecure. It's the subtle suffering of not knowing what's going to happen next. All those kinds of suffering we have. So the person who's on the vehicle of individual liberation, they have compassion actually for beings, but it's not so strong, that when they have that ability to sort of be liberated, they just sort of go, oh, I just want to go to that state. Whereas this bodhisattva feels when they're, their compassion is so intense that if you were to say that, it'd be like that, right? If you said to the parent whose child in the hospital and their life is threatened, oh, I've got a ticket for you to go to the beach, they would say, there would be no question, right? They would say, what are you talking about? I'm not interested in leaving my child's side. It's that kind of feeling. Yeah. So, and that's what what's the word, not forces, but that's what allows them, I guess you would say, to take rebirth, actually. And so they say they take rebirth through the power of, I'll get into this more in the text, but of compassion and aspirational prayers. Because sometimes during life, like Reed Rimsky was doing, may I be able to help others through interfaith efforts? May I be able to have that kind of personality and that kind of mind and that kind of body that can do that kind of work. So they do prayers, and then when they're in the intermediate state, those prayers combined with their intention allow them to choose or they'll take rebirth.
Amazing. And I got an ordinary being when we die. There's that fear of like not of non-existence of the ego, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and that like I mean, until you directly realize emptiness, you always have that bit of ego,
Yeah.
right? And so, there's the mental afflictions of dying with that kind of fear brings you back again and again and again until you finally directly realize emptiness.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can't, and that's what's interesting, isn't it? You can't help it. In other words, as long as you haven't realized emptiness directly, that fear arises, a fear of annihilation or a fear of non. And that leads to a kind of grasping, and that grasping activates karma, and you can't help it. Yeah.
That is.
Yeah. But, okay, so that always so that verse, I mean, those two verses were describing, yeah, you got it, how that kind of bodhisattva takes rebirth. And then the next one is from the second through the seventh bhumis, where it says, although gone beyond all worlds, they do not depart from the world. It's kind of a poetic description also, isn't it? Of like they're beyond the world, but they entered the world, for the sake of the world, they engage in the world without being affected by its defilements. One point is that's hard, isn't it? Like not to be affected by, um, by the defilements of the world. And then, just as a lotus growing in the water is unsullied by impurities in the water, in the same way they are born in the world but are not sullied by worldly dharmas. And this is at one point, is that's a standard metaphor in Buddhism, is it? Like, so a lotus comes out of the mud, and if actually if you go around here, there are lotus ponds, right, that have lotuses growing. On the bottom, it's quite good. Lotus ponds actually are quite muddy at the bottom, aren't they? And yet when you look at the petals of lotus, they're kind of very pure, pristine. So it's a standard metaphor for what bodhisattvas are like, actually, that they enter into, what's the word? Places, they intentionally enter into places where there are mental afflictions, but they're not affected by the mental afflictions, right? So they enter into places where there's uh, conflict and anger and all kinds of, problems, but they're not affected by those as they would for others, is one point. And then it says, they are not sullied by worldly dharmas. That's a reference to the 8 worldly dharmas, right? So, which are like, that they're not motivated. And actually, it's quite hard. I mean, that's a big topic, so I won't spend too long. But but so like for example, reputation, praise or blame, or gain and loss. Like, even if you try not to be influenced by those things, right? Like, um, we do things to get somebody's approval. We do things so that people like us. We do things to get more stuff. So, and what they're getting at is that bodhisattvas like this stay genuinely grounded in compassion, right? And even if, what's the word, people criticize them for doing what's loving, it doesn't make them doubt or stop what they're doing. And even if people were to sort of say, oh, it'd be great if you did this other thing that's not, it's more self. Actually, it happens, doesn't it, in our society, where people say you should be more selfish sometimes, but they're not moved by that kind of message at all.
So you got to look out for number one.
Yeah,
it's common and for people to say that. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
the antithesis.
Yeah, and that's actually that's a great that attitude, which is a common phrase, right? Got to look out for number one. That's actually that's one way of, actually, it's funny, it just struck me, and thought of that phrase before in this way, but that phrase actually gets at what bodhisattvas specifically overcome. They sometimes talk about like self I don't like this translation, self-cherishing, but like self-centeredness or something, right? Where the idea that you are number one, right? Not that you're one of limitless number, but that I'm number one, right? And then that you look out for a number one first, that's actually what bodhisattvas specifically overcome, that they don't have that approach to living at all. They view themselves as just one among an infinite number of beings who are all equally worthy of compassion. So they wouldn't say I'm number one to start with, and then they wouldn't look out for number one more than they would look out for anybody else. So yeah, you're getting it. They would actually, and if no matter how many people told them that, they wouldn't be influenced by it, which is hard not to be. Um, so that's describing this kind of bodhisattva here, where they don't have that, they're not influenced by those things, right? The wish for a good reputation or for people to like them or for people, they're just motivated by love, compassion for others. And so, and another point I'll just make is these bodhisattvas are progressing through the six perfections. You know, we teach generosity and ethics, patience, uh, joyous, joyful perseverance, and so on. Meditative concentration and wisdom. And on the um, on the first six grounds, bhumis, each one the bodhisattva becomes, what's the word they call it in Chandrakirti's Majjhimaka Avatara. He makes a point that bodhisattvas on the first bhumi become, calls it surpassing at or especially skilled at generosity. Like they practice all the perfections, but on the first bhumi they become especially good at the practice of generosity. On the second bhumi, they become especially good at the practice of morality. Like they give examples where even in their dreams, they don't have immoral. And immoral in that sense doesn't mean somebody else's list. It means acts that are not in accordance with love. You know, things like that. Acts that are harm others. Acts that are hurtful to yourself or others, actually. That they stop having the impulse to do things, even in their subconscious, you could say, that would harm themselves or others. You know, and so on. And each and then the third would be patience, third bhumi. So where they, you know, bodhisattvas before that have worked a lot on patience, but at that bhumi, they're able to kind of tolerate almost any kind of harm, you know, and because they've realized the nature of reality, they don't grasp at an intrinsic existence self, so they don't feel defensive when they're harmed. Instead, they feel so on. So those bodhisattvas are progressing through those different six perfections and are becoming especially adept at them and achieve, you know, more and more good qualities, therefore, as they sort of progress. And they're progressing towards Buddhahood, so that they're doing all that. Those are their practices then. And then the next set are for the 8th through the 10th bhumis. I'm sorry, no, just the next one verse is for the 8th through the 10th. So it says, accomplishing tasks, their mind constantly blazes like fire. They permanently abide in equipoise within the concentration of the absorption of pacification. And I'll make a couple of points about these bodhisattvas. One point is at the they say that at the 8th bhumi, a bodhisattva no longer has any mental afflictions. So they've overcome even the most subtle ones. And I think a point before that, it said that they can still have subtle levels, but they don't, what's the word? Like, so before the 8th bhumi, one way of saying it, I've read in the text and described it, where it's like, you know, for ourselves, when we get a mental affliction, we get controlled by it, right? Like, so if somebody really hurts your feelings, for example, you get angry. Even if you don't want to feel angry, you get, you know, sometimes it's hard to sleep, right? And you be agitated. And it lasts a while and you have to try to work on yourself. We call it, right? It's like work on that. In these previous bhumis, like, what's the word to say, right? The bodhisattva might have a kind of subtle level of agitation and go, oh, wow, like that bothered me. Oh, okay, but you know, like this is actually a person who is controlled by their mental afflictions. They don't know what they're doing. Practice forgiveness, and they practice forgiveness, and they let it go. You know, and they do it quite easily, but it's not that they don't have any, because of their previous habituation, they haven't yet completely uprooted those tendencies. So like they can have a passing thought. And I can't remember, she said at those levels, they, because of previous, I find this part funny. He said at those levels, like they don't think the thought of, I've never wanted to take care of, like, but they could have a passing sort of like, with us, we kind of, we earn money for ourselves first or something, right? And then we maybe give a little bit to charity, so we do, there's a sense of, what's the word, self-focus. For them, he said, they may have a passing thought, like, oh, I guess I should take care of, you know, myself in this way. But then they kind of think, well, that can help others. And if it does, they do take care of themselves. If it doesn't, they don't. It's like it's all like they quickly have this thought. And it's not that they don't do self-care. You have to take bodhisattvas do take care of themselves, but it's like what Reba Rinpoche was saying, right? Well, in other words, I want my body to be healthy so I can work for others, so I can be a benefit in the world, so I can be engaged in the world. But it's that kind of approach, if that makes sense.
I was going to say the Dalai Lama was asked in an interview if he still got angry, and he thought, well, if anger was no longer part of his internal mechanism, he went almost, which means which was great. Oh. So that's kind of that in
passing thought.
It makes me think of like the you see some people who are extremely wealthy, and some of them give a lot of money to charity. But that's not why they got extremely wealthy. It's something they do after. Whereas somebody at this level, let's say they were to become extremely wealthy, it would be because the intent behind it would be to give it up to help. There's a difference.
Yeah.
I mean, a huge difference.
Yeah. You reminded me, just I'll share move your story say a little bit, but when I first got to know Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who was the founder, that used to be, he's passed away a year ago, almost exactly a year ago next month, but he was the spiritual director of FPMT, which is Center's part of. I remember when I was first his student, it was funny. Everybody noticed it seemed like almost doing people would note on that. He became a very popular teacher to a certain point. He was a wonderful teacher, and so people would make offerings to it. People would like want to offer him something because they felt gratitude to him, and it was like if you walked in after somebody, you would get whatever they had like. So if you went to see him, it's like if you went in first and gave him an offering, and then I was the next person in line, it was almost inevitable I would receive whatever you would just. It's like he would say, "Oh, here," whatever it might be, and it's kind of actually it was he was always like that, and would always just give anything, and he was somebody actually we're too far into detail, but I mean he would his robe sometimes would have a hole in them, like a big hole, and it was because a bug, like a what's it called, like some bug that wanted that ate wool or something, would be there. So he would cut out a patch so they could have a home, and then he would set up a house like a little like. And so his robes might have numerous holes in them because he had set up, and then like his attendant would go in the room, and they would be like these little like whatever like little houses for insect. Um, and he was somebody where even he was worrying about mosquitoes, but he was worried they were hungry. So he would go out and he would like have his, he'd be like,
I hope he doesn't get itchy.
he has a different relationship to his body for sure.
Read a story where he would feed mice on purpose too. Like he would let people trap them, he'd take them out, but he'd set out little things for them to eat.
Yeah, he loved any creature, and like he was quite a remarkable person. So yeah, so he was like, right, and he later like he was actually like what you're describing in a way that sometimes I think because he was quite inspiring, there were people who were wealthy, who were his students, who said, "Oh, I want to help with your projects," but he never took any money for himself. Like it was never he received money in order to sponsor events, or he would sort of indirectly say, "Oh, please sponsor this event." And it wasn't even for he was director of I always thought that he was the spiritual director of FPMT, which is hundreds of centers around the world. And it was like, wow, if I were spiritual director of an organization, I would be worried about the organization. Sort of like, oh, I've got to be responsible and do a good job, which, and I'd be worrying about that, whereas he would be then, I would look and he'd like somebody would offer him something and he would use it to sponsor an event at a place that had nothing to do with that. Like it wasn't like, oh, this is my group, so I need to use the offerings towards that. They'd be like sponsoring something at a place in somewhere that had no connection at all to his, and he had all these things that he was responsible for, but he would immediately give to the thing that was not what he was responsible for because that was what was more in need. So yeah, no self-cherishing that. And you can see this. I remember that once I noticed that, I mean, I'm just about to step down as director of Guidi Summa Center. I remember that at a certain point I noticed I was like, I'm mean, just one small center, right? Like not like something big, but it's like, oh, I've got to, like focus on this. And then like somebody would ask me something related to something else, and I'd be like, I don't have time, I have to focus. And then I was like realizing, oh, that's a kind of self. It's like, oh, it's my center, so I should help with my, as if it's not equally maybe it's more beneficial to help with somebody else's that day, or so it's like it's the subtlety of how that self-focus can happen.
See that at work, right? If we're doing, some sort of big thing. Well, oh, it's my case. It's my,
Yeah.
Even if the result's the same, if somebody else takes it over, my case.
Yeah.
Of course I feel that.
Yeah. Um, One other point that's made in this comment and the commentary at this section, I'll just share it, is they make a point that they say, so I was mentioning how the bodhisattvas focus on the different perfections as they go through the six perfections, the first six grounds. And then Gyaltsab Je in his commentary made a point, which I just thought was intriguing, which he said, so on the sixth bhumi, like on the fifth bhumi, the bodhisattva becomes very, very adept at the practice of the perfection of concentration. And so before that, long before that, way, way, way before that, they've achieved calm abiding and they've achieved the ability to enter different meditative absorptions and so on. But on the fifth bhumi, they gain this ability to like sort of enter and leave different meditative absorptions like very quickly. They can jump from one level of concentration to another. They can go from not being in concentration to very quickly entering concentration and leaving it. They have this kind of ability to concentrate their mind to a remarkable degree. And then on the sixth ground, they develop kind of an unusual level of adept skill in the perfection of wisdom, understanding the ultimate nature of reality. So then they can combine this concentration with wisdom in a way that's really quite remarkable. And Gyaltsab Je makes a point, I'm going to simplify it here, but he basically says they reach a point where then they could easily enter uh, the complete peace. They kind of enter a concentration, which I think is being referred to here, where they could very easily enter personal liberation. And they sort of recognize that they have this experience when they know, and that's where they particularly have this sense of that they're great compassion. Like that they're not, that they sort of recognize, oh, that's what that experience is like. That's what I could easily enter that, and then I think, but of course I want to engage for others, and so there's an experience at that level like that. And then they eventually get to the eighth level where they no longer have any mental afflictions at all, but they still have the subtle imprints, they call it, of the mental afflictions, which cause things to still appear to them dualistically. So they still have a appearance of self and other, like they still have some subtle conceptual thinking. So they're not yet a Buddha, and they're not yet omniscient like a Buddha is. So that's where it's describing now. Propelled by the power of prayers, and because of being separated from conceptuality, all conceptuality, well, that's not literally true. In order to ripen beings, they do not need to employ effort. So, oh, where did I go here? Kensei Rinpoche made a point here where it says separated from all conceptuality. He made a point when he was teaching this where he said, of course, only a Buddha is literally free from all conceptuality. So he said, so what does this first mean? What does that line mean? Kensei Rinpoche kind of elaborated. And he said, actually, what it's referring to is what they call improper conceptualization. And what that is so at this level, what happens is this improper conceptualization is where you have a conceptual thought that doesn't accord with reality. which we all have tons of, by the way, right? So it's where you like, so I might think, at our level, right? There's very gross improper conceptualization where I might think, um, actually, there's very simplistic levels, right? Where I could think, oh, this is this, where it's actually that, right? I make a mistake. But we also do it in relation to each other, where I ascribe the motivation to you. Oh, you're being mean, and really you just didn't know something, and so or you didn't, or you were thinking about something else. I misascribe a motivation. Then there are like, what's the word? We also can have what's the word? And so improper conceptualization means inaccurate conceptualization, right? And then there are also conceptualizations traditionally that are listed. Like we tend to see impermanent things as though they're permanent, right? So I think, so I might look at something and think, oh, tomorrow I'll, not recognizing that I don't know that, right? Like you see your friend, you say, oh, next time I'll see them, I'll say this, where that's a kind of assumption that they'll be there. Where, so it's improper in the sense maybe they will, maybe they won't, but I don't know that for sure. I don't know I'll be there tomorrow, right? So I'm ascribing a kind of permanent. I don't mean permanent is not in the sense improper. Permanence doesn't mean I think I'm eternal and I'm never going to die and I have that. It's not that, right? That'd be silly, right? But we actually do that in a way, right? I think, oh, next class I'll see Jan or something, right? Where I hope so, but the truth is I don't know I'll be here, right? Or that, or we don't know because things are that impermanent, right? And we're surprised when something happens, right? When a nation ends or a person dies or because we don't recognize things change instant by instant. That's the nature of things, right? So that was when I'm saying improper conceptualization. It's that we grasp at things in this way that assumes they exist in a way they don't. We also do that in nature of self, right? I see a self where there's not a self. We also do that in relation to pleasure, right? Where, in other words, we ascribe a level of oftentimes of pleasantness to things or unpleasantness if we're angry that isn't intrinsic to that thing, and we do that all the time, actually, right? Like, oh, this will be so great. Where actually it's just a concept. It may be great, it may not be great, and so on. So there are many kinds of conceptualizations that don't accord with reality. And what Ken Rinpoche was noting is up to the eighth bhumi, even those bodhisattvas have occasional inaccurate conceptual labels. These eighth bhumi and beyond bodhisattvas aren't, only a Buddha has no conceptuality at all. But these bodhisattvas, they no longer have inaccurate conceptualization or improper conceptualization. All their concepts accord with reality, which is an interesting point, isn't it? Because it actually is disturbing if you think how often our own concepts don't accord with reality, isn't it? If you actually check yourself, it's quite often happens, doesn't it? That I just sort of, well, the example I'll see tomorrow is that's that basic, right? Or my plan for, my plan for this or that, you know, my grandfather used to say, God, what was it? Man plans and God's laughs, or something like that. It was a saying he had, but he was getting it. What is it saying God, but it was getting at a similar observation that the plans you make don't always accord with what's going to actually happen. Often don't. Um, so, so that's that point. And then it says here, and in order to ripen sentient beings, they do not need to employ effort. And again, it's a funny. I find this part funny is just like that one, right? They have concepts, but they're quite subtle concepts that accord with reality. Here also, these bodhisattvas, they say actually have to like Buddhas are completely without effort. They're totally spontaneous, totally. They don't have any conceptual thoughts, so they don't actually have to make any effort. They spontaneously manifest whatever is best for others out of their compassion. Whereas they say these kind of bodhisattvas in the eighth, 10th bhumis um, have to make just the slightest effort. In other words, like so, there's and actually the point is in a way like this. Actually, for us, if you contrast it, right, like it's hard, actually, isn't it? Like to do, like if you take on a project or an effort to help even one person, it's often hard work, Or if you do a volunteer activity, it could be hard work, If you want to raise a child, it's quite hard work, And what they're getting at is that these kind of bodhisattvas, there's a spontaneity, naturalness. I don't know what word to use. Like where compared to us, it's like it's effortless. It's not yet as effortless as a Buddha. but it's like and a lot of times in Buddhist texts they'll talk about, there's a term, play, I guess is the way it's translated. Like, they sometimes say that, it's like for them it's like that, in other words, that it's not, it doesn't require the same level that if you train in compassion, you get to that level of this, your efforts, your activities are like play, or are um, relatively effortless, you could say. Um, and it helped for me. It just makes us clear how much effort we often have to make to do something good, because it's not natural to us yet. We haven't habituated to it over lifetimes. Is what this is implying.
Um, does brief effort also mean like when you're in the presence of a realized bodhisattva, or a geshe, um, doesn't the presence, is that somewhat like play, because they don't even have to say anything, they're transmitting?
Actually, yeah, actually, that gets at this next part. Actually, tell me if this answers it, because I like you answer that right now. Because let's do the next verse, because it says they know precisely whatever appearance and with which method each student needs to be tamed, whether by teaching, by displaying a form body, by conduct, or by deeds. I think that's getting at what you're saying there. Where there is that such a bodhisattva, this is saying, like spontaneously is aware of what method will help what student, and and so and it lists four things here: teaching, which means actually giving a teaching, like a verbal, sort of expounding or something, or giving verbal explanations of a text or topic. But then form bodies means they manifest their body in a way that will help others. Then conduct means they'll what's the word? The example that Gyaltsab gives is they'll act with desire in order to illustrate the faults of desire, like um, and then behavior, the way they come and go. And I'll make the point actually. If, I mean, there are many, many. This is so the point here. I'll make a few points. One is that bodhisattvas like this teach by teaching verbally, but it's getting at what you're getting, I think, which is everything about their embodiment, the teaching. And I think that's useful. One way is just to know about it, but the other is, as I think Jan, you were kind of just implying, that if you're around such a being, if you're aware of that, if you pay attention, it can be quite helpful. And it's true actually. That's my experience anyway. It's like that if you get the opportunity to be around such practitioners, such beings, um, yeah, I remember one time. I'm just different examples, but one was probably in my head. I remember once I brought Gyume Khyentse Rinpoche to a meeting I had with psychologists. I'm a psychologist, it's my job, but so I took him to a meeting with other psychologists, and it's a meeting I was part of for many, many years. They were like, I was often part of this group of people, and he was just sitting there, and I was sort of interacting, and suddenly I was aware in a way I had never been before of, you know, I mean, I let's say it right. I cared about those people. I liked them. I wasn't, it wasn't something bad, but I was aware of a level on which I was sort of being wanting to present myself in a certain way, and sort of had an attachment to a certain professional self-image or something. And because Khyentse Rinpoche was sitting there, I was watching him and how he was, and I was watching myself, and I was like, oh wow, I'm sort of putting on a little bit of artifice, I guess is the word. Sort of, oh, like I'm this professionally. And I was like, I suddenly felt this nausea. I was like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. Like I'm tired of that. That's not how I want to live. And I was like, he didn't say a word. And then I was like so grateful. I was like, well, I can drop that now. I don't need to sort of hold a pretense or something. That was sort of, I don't know, I probably think came from some sense of like, oh, I've got to be something to make a living or something like that. And then I was like, I don't want to do that. And I was like, and I felt so grateful to him. And I was like, he didn't say a word, but just the way he sat there, because he was so without artifice, that it showed I was sort of able to see my own artificialness or something in a way I hadn't before. Anyway, I mean, the point is like these kinds of bodhisattvas, just by the way of being present in the world, teach the Dharma, um, not just the way they speak. So one other story. I'm trying to tell you the story to me, but I remember that one time in 1989, I was at the Kalachakra in Los Angeles. But I remember that I was watching Lama Zopa was there. He was like somehow at a seat where I could see him, and I watched like how he was looking at the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama was the teacher, of course. And then like afterwards, as soon as Dalai left, people would always run up to Lama Zopa, questions, one thing, something like I would. And I was watching him, and suddenly I thought I had this recognition. I was like, oh, every gesture of his body is Dharma.
Mm.
It was like the way he looked at the student who came up, the way he looked at the Dalai Lama, the way he looked at the person who was like telling people where to sit or something. Um, so that's that by conduct, right? How they conduct every movement of their body at this level of practice. And before that, it's not, we're not able to do that yet. Um, so I don't know if we had time. So anyway, I mean, this is describing again. I'll conclude with this, like this section, which we'll finish it easily next time. Move on to the next section, but um, on the one hand, this section is like getting at very advanced levels of experience, that are certainly beyond me. I'm not at that level, far from it. And I was sort of, as I was preparing, I was like, yeah, no, I hope it's still useful. I was sort of preparing to talk about this. I hope it's still useful to people to kind of know this is what can happen. This is what you can. And part of the point here, there's 2 points being made, I think, that I'll just say. One is you can become this. The text is implicitly saying, the implication behind this is you yourself can become like that. This is explaining what you can evolve yourself into, is one point. The other point the text is explicitly making actually is your Buddha nature uh is not, and the Buddha nature of such a being are totally the same. Or it doesn't change. It's that space-like clear light nature of your mind is the same as the space-like clear light nature of the mind of such a bodhisattva. And that's why you can become that. That makes sense. Because you have that nature of mind already, and right this moment, you could become a being like this. And if you understand this kind of being, then you'll understand also what the pure state is like, because that's the process of becoming the Buddha. And so it's sort of that's the purpose of this. So on the one hand, I was sort of aware, well, it could seem a little distant for our direct experience, certainly is mine, but I hope it does that for us. It's sort of one is to sort of recognize if you come across somebody like that, wow, take advantage of the chance to interact with them. But the other is recognize, actually, that if you do come across such a person, right, like who's at that level, to recognize the ultimate nature of your mind and the ultimate nature of their mind are not different, right? And therefore, that's why you can become any quality a Buddha has, you can have, right? Because you already have that nature within you, a Buddha, that you're Tathagata Garbha, that seed or that essence of it, one thus gone of a Buddha. So that's the point of this topic. Again, if it seems a little distant, I hope that helps sort of relate to why it's being explained by Maitreya, maybe to some extent. He's also explaining it probably because he's also teaching people at those levels. But for those of us who are not, it's still a value, I hope. But we should stop there. But, so we'll say the dedication. So the supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. And then dedicate these merits, which are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side. So that the I, who is merely labeled, is totally empty from its own side, may achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, in order to lead all sentient beings who are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, to the state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. And finally, just by studying this topic from the Uttara Tantra text, may all of us be able to achieve all those experiences of the bodhisattvas that were being described, such as that supreme compassion and realization of the ultimate nature of our own minds and so on. May we become like that in order to be a benefit and lights the world. Thanks. everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, Jen has an announcement. Oh,
We have an announcement. For everybody, actually. Can you hear me? Am I projecting enough? Okay.
Yes.
His Eminence Ling Rinpoche is coming to teach us in I believe it's May 5th and 6th.
4th and 5th.
4th and 5th. Okay. And we need volunteers to help bring people to their seats and help collect money at tables. Also, if you're strong, we need people to help set up on Friday night. So if you're interested in doing that, it's a great moment, and volunteers, I believe, will have their own section to sit in. If you're willing to do that, please contact me at SPC at I'm going to mispronounce the name now, GaiaSamaja.org. But thank you so much. Okay, so put that in the hopper. See if that's something you'd like to do. It's a rare opportunity. He's one of these people who we just discussed in the teaching. So it's a blessing to be around him. Thank you.
Include that in the weekly newsletter too.
Yeah.
I know I've asked volunteers for it.
For first group work,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
guess
for the
you
one-
yell
but,
it,
but yeah,
and,
absolutely.
I want to wait until
Till we get
yeah,
volunteers. Got it.
before.
And his teaching will be at the Hilton, not here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big
Right.
event, so it'll be at the Hilton.
Yeah,
That was
it's a different-
co-sponsored by our center and 2 other groups. So.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Len.